Hi there, this is Paul Colmsey from Seven Sigma Business Solutions in Western Australia, and I am here today to talk about the topic of powerful questions. This is the third video in the series that I've been recording, and the idea behind powerful questions really comes from the facilitated problem solving work that I do. I'm a practitioner of an approach called dialogue mapping, and this is what you're seeing on the screen right now. And I've noticed in my dialogue mapping work that certain questions or the framing of certain questions always seem to work better in trying to deal with complex problems with diverse stakeholders than other questions. So as a result, I thought I'd record a video covering some of these questions, and I thought for those interested in the dialogue mapping approach, I would use the dialogue mapping software, and I can talk about the practice of how I would capture these questions and handle them in a facilitated workshop. But it is important to note that you can really use these questions no matter what sort of technique that you use, and really the power is in the questions themselves, not in the particular means you might use to facilitate outcomes. So with that, let's look at the map. This is where we left off, and so why are we here? To learn about powerful questions, and as I said, learning about these questions allows you to have increased chance of breakthrough in complex issues. I did jokingly say earlier that that might get you into trouble with your boss, but that was really just to highlight the question, the idea, and the pro-con nature of the dialogue mapping approach. Where we spent the first video was on this question, which I labeled the platitude buster question, or the KPI question, and I have a map here that I'm not going to go into detail, but just to show you in case you didn't see the first video, there's a discussion on the platitude busting question. Now, it is not my intent to recap this question nor the previous workshop, which was the key focus area question. You can go and look at those YouTube videos to have a look for yourself. Now, what I am going to do though is focus on the topic of this video. So what is the next powerful question? It is this, the I told you so question. And like these previous two, I'm going to put it into its own map. So let's just do that now. So let's open that up, and we have a blank canvas here to work on this. Right, so I guess the first question you might be asking is, well, what on earth is an I told you so question? And the answer really is to do with risk and how risk is perceived and how you can find out what the true risks are. So let's do it this way. So the first question that arises from this is, what is an I told you so? And the answer to that really, well, there's two parts to the answers. So as I said, it's related to risk and how risk is perceived. So this is an example of an I told you so moment. It is this, a risk that was identified, but it was not ranked or handled appropriately, and therefore never properly managed. So that's one form. So a risk was identified, but no one really understood the significance of that risk, or maybe they didn't appreciate the significance of that risk, and it was miscalculated, or its impact, or I guess potential for outrage, wasn't appropriately handled. But here's another one. Here's another form of I told you so, and this is a more insidious one. A risk that was never identified or communicated, but it was known. So known to stakeholders. So that really are the two kind of I told you so moments. And the question then is, well, okay, why does this happen? And I'm going to make a contention here that many people may disagree with, but I will give you some good, juicy reference material to explain why I've come to believe this. The why does this happen? The answer to this question is this. If you perform a risk analysis performing a risk analysis by asking the question, what are the risks, is not particularly effective. So I know that some people would probably disagree with that contention that I'm making there. So my justification for this, and we're going to explore this in a little bit, is this. There's a cognitive science reason. Asking this way, it engages the well, it's not the wrong part, but I'm going to put it down this way. It engages the wrong part of the brain to deal with the answers needed. Okay, so what do I mean by this? What is this idea of engaging the wrong part of the brain? So to answer that, we have to ask a different question. So let's ask this question. The question is this: what type of risks, or what kinds of risks, are there? And I'm going to give you basically two answers. So some risks are based on known rules and probabilities. So maybe an example of this might be something like, well, there is a risk that we could have a hardware failure with our computer system. How do we mitigate the risk? Well, we do backups and we have a recovery procedure. That's the sort of one that's it's based on logic, so it's quite logical. I might actually say logical. But then you also have some risks are highly ambiguous, where rules and probabilities are unknown or very unclear. So there you go. There's two kind of risks. One is really straight out risk in terms of odds of something happening in likelihood, and the other one is a lot more ambiguous. So really, you can call this one risk and you can call this one ambiguity. There's an implication of this, and the implication is this. And I'm going to put this in bold because I think it's really important. There is a big difference between how risk and ambiguity is processed in the brain. Now, it turns out that, let's see if I still have bold on. No, I don't. So here's my supporting arguments to this contention. Risk is often, and testing has been done, and I'm going to put a video on in a moment, or reference a video where you can see this. So risk is often calculated in the area of the brain that performs logical reasoning, which that in itself is not a problem. But ambiguity is processed. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist, so the way I put this down isn't necessarily the way it would technically be, but I'm going to say it's in the more primal areas of the brain. So let's say ambiguity is processed in the inner brain, where emotions are also processed. And what's the implication of this? There's a really important implication. So implication. The implication is this. With ambiguity, emotions play a more significant role. And let's fix up the spelling of ambiguity. That is close enough. So with ambiguity, emotions play a more significant role. Now, it may be, so you might be saying to me, well, what's your basis for that? Where are you getting this from? Now, by the way, I've actually always sort of instinctively felt this way, but I did watch a fantastic video, and it's available on YouTube, and it's called Pivot Thinking. The Pivot Thinking, the Neuroscience of Design, and it talks about this idea of risk versus ambiguity and where things are processed in the brain. And I highly recommend you have a look at this video. So what I'm going to do using this software, I'm just going to drag and drop that link to the YouTube video onto my dialogue map so that you now have that. Right. So that's where we are so far. Let's come back to our core thing. So that's my rationale for the I told you so question. So the next question that comes from this are, what are examples of an I told you so question? Now you notice that it's not really a question here, it's the way the question is asked. This is what's important with this particular one, maybe compared to the first two questions that we went through. So here is the first one. What keeps you up at night on this project? So instead of saying, what are the risks that we see on this, you ask, what keeps you up at night? And straight away you can see that you're appealing more to the gut than the logical part of someone's rationale. Here's another one, and here's a more overt way of saying this question. How about this? If things went bad, and 6 months later, or 6 months from now, you said, I told you so, what would it be? And I'll give you one more example of a I told you so framed question, but this one, there's a couple of caveats to it. It's a bit more straightforward. What are your concerns? So there are 3 examples of the sort of questions that I would ask in a risk-oriented workshop, or when you're looking to identify risks. And the reason for asking it that way has basically been captured in this rationale here, in terms of the brain processes risk and ambiguity differently. So therefore, if you were to just ask a logically framed question on risk, you may avoid, or you may not get, the ambiguity-based answers. Another question. So the benefits of asking the question this way. Let's just make sure we've captured that. The benefits of asking the question this way is the fact that it engages both the logical and emotional parts of the brain, and therefore it should give you a more accurate picture of what the real risks are. Should give you a more accurate picture of what the real risks are. Now, one last thing. What are there's a couple of key sort of aspects or key things to think about when asking this question. So, key aspects to this question when facilitating. Facilitating being one of those words that I seem to be biologically, it's just impossible for me to spell that correctly, but anyway, I might have got it right that time. Here is, I think, one of the really neat ways you can ask this question in a way that will really engage the ambiguity part of the brain and potentially surface risks that may not otherwise be seen. So, how about this? Ask for a commitment from someone first, or a group. Right? Ask for a commitment first before asking for concerns. So basically saying to someone, what can you be counted on for? And then say, and what are your concerns? Why is that a good thing? Well, by requiring upfront commitments, and that's where the ambiguity lies, because you're now being made to commit to something and you have some uncertainties. So instead of saying, well, the risk could be this, and this could happen, and this could happen, now you're saying, well, okay, I'm now committing to this and basically delivering on this particular part. What's going to stop me from doing so, and where am I going to see my, where is the ambiguity? So we can say by requiring upfront commitments, ambiguous risks are brought to the surface. So that's my first piece of advice. It can be really interesting to ask people for a bit of commitment up front and then ask them for the risks, because that makes it real. It becomes, it's not just a all ideas, no commitment. Now you're actually having to commit to taking a course of action, and as a result, certain risks might appear. Another really important thing to do is, well, put it this way, I'll put the pro first. Many people are very uncomfortable with ambiguity. And with ambiguity, because it creates anxiety. And so there's a couple of things that are worth doing to address this. One, educate participants about wicked problems. If you haven't heard of wicked problems, I do recommend you have a look at my blog, or you Google the term, because there's a whole, it describes a class of problems that are inherently really tough to solve, and ambiguity and wicked problems are almost intertwined. They're so close together. But I found that, in fact, it was my own personal experience and the experience of people I've worked with, that when you name it for what it is, people kind of realize it's a phenomena, and therefore they don't sort of punish themselves as much. And I found that explaining that there are wicked problems, they are tough to solve, they require collaboration, and there is always uncertainty, that helps a lot in terms of getting people comfortable to talk about stuff that's ambiguous. The other one you can do, and this is a more general piece of advice, create the conditions, environment, where people are not afraid to speak their truths. So I think a lot of times logic is used to sort of seal over things that are seen as ambiguous, because of this fact that ambiguity creates anxiety. So let's do a little bit of a recap, because that was pretty much everything I wanted to have to say. So this question we're talking about is the I told you so question. What is an I told you so? Well, for me, it's basically it's a risk that it was identified but not appropriately handled, or it was a risk that was never identified yet it was actually known to stakeholders and it was never elicited. Why did this happen? I made the contention that performing a risk analysis by asking a very logically framed question, such as, well, what are the risks, is not particularly effective, and I contended that it engages the wrong part of the brain to deal with all of the answers needed. Now, then to elaborate on this a little bit, I said, well, what kind of risks are there? And I've made an argument that there are logical, or ones that are fairly well understood in terms of cause and effect. If you do this, this will happen, therefore we mitigate it this way. But there are risks that are highly ambiguous, where you don't understand the relationship between cause and effect. And the implication of these two different risks is that there's a big difference between how risk and ambiguity is processed in the brain. Risk is calculated in the frontal lobe sort of area that does all the logical reasoning. Ambiguity is processed in the inner brain, where emotions are also processed, which is probably where the anxiety reflex comes from. And so with ambiguity, emotions play a significant role. So basically you should ask questions that tap into that part of the brain. The reference for that was that YouTube video that I mentioned earlier, which was this one called Pivot Thinking, which I should be able to scroll up and give you the title of, I think. There it is there, Pivot Thinking, the Neuroscience of Design. Fantastic video, covers a whole lot of stuff that I really liked. And finally, so the examples I gave you of an I told you so question, well, what keeps you up at night on this thing? If things went bad and you were to say an I told you so, then what would it be? And asking people what their concerns are. But remember, coming back to here, If you're going to ask someone what their concerns are, ask for a commitment first, right? So what can you be counted on for? Then ask them what their concerns are, because that surfaces the ambiguity aspect of things, okay? That may not be surfaced when you just ask people to identify risks. What are the benefits of asking the question this way? It engages both parts of the brain, which should give you a more accurate picture of what the real risks are on a problem or project. Okay, so I'm going to close this map now and take you back out to the route map, and you can see now that we're back to where we started, and we have 3 powerful questions now. So we have the platitude buster, the key focus area question, and the I told you so question. If you would like more information, any feedback, love to hear feedback, please either comment on this YouTube video or go to I have a blog, it's called cleverworkarounds.com. You can also follow me on Twitter using the tag or the handle Paul Colmsey. So thank you for your time and attention, and I hope these powerful questions help you in your endeavors.